event, which is a conversation between our distinguished speaker, David Schneider, who will talk with Dr. Devorah Baum and Dr. Katie Power. Now, by way of introduction, David started as an actor-writer on shows like I'm Alan Partridge.
Yeah, it's not a lie.
I wasn't doubting it was true. I was just wondering what it was like to work with, Steve Coogan. But there you go. And the day-to-day. David now works mainly behind the camera as a writer. He co-wrote The Death of Stalin, which was nominated for 2 BAFTAs, as well as winning a host of other awards, and recently directed the HBO sitcom Avenue 5, and was part of the team behind Veep. David has a keen interest in Yiddish culture. His grandfather was a Yiddish playwright and his grandmother a Yiddish actress. And he has researched. I don't know whether you want me to read the next line, actually, but I've been told to, I've got to be faithful, that you have a sadly unfinished PhD.
Yeah, I mean,
if you ever want to come back and do well, always be grateful. But anyway, and you're currently writing a movie and TV series, both set in the Second World War. So that's our kind of keynote speaker. And then to introduce the people who are going to be in conversation with him, Dr. Devorah Baum is an associate professor in English literature here at Southampton. She's an author of 3 books, which came out in one came out in 2023, entitled On Marriage, Feeling Jewish, a book about just about anyone. Interesting title. And The Jewish Joke, an essay, with Josh. You'll have to pronounce that name for me. Okay, you've got it. She co-directed the creative documentary film The New Man in 2016 and the feature film Husband in 2023. And our third member of tonight's panel is Katie Power. Dr. Katie Power is a recent alumna of the Parkes Institute and the University of Southampton, and at present is the digital officer for the Institute. Her research focuses on the history of Yiddish culture in London, with particular focus on Yiddish theatre in London during the 20th century. Her work has been featured as part of a museum at the Jewish Museum London, and she recently participated in the BBC 4 documentary Sticks and Stones, Jewish Comedy and Anti-Semitism. So you've got a highly qualified panel here, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. So over to the main event. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark. Thank you everyone online joining us and everyone in the room. It's great to see so many of you here in sunny Southampton. I always say sunny Southampton, it's never sunny. Now tonight we've sort of broadly themed this as In Conversation with David Schneider, but on this theme of Jewish humour, responses to Jewish suffering. However, I'm going to pivot it slightly, and we will get there, I promise, by trying to look at the before David phase of David. And earlier I was like, oh, do we do the after David? And I realised that's not coming just yet. We'll have the David present, but I'm going to do the before David context. And to do that, I'm actually going to take us back to the 1940s. And when we were talking about this, we realised it's probably important to provide some context of why me, why here. And I don't want you all to panic. You haven't signed up for Katie Power in Conversation with Katie Power. David will speak at some point. But Mark, I think, really in the introduction explained it, but I recently completed my PhD research on Yiddish theatre in London. And in the decade I spent doing that, I've come across your face an awful lot, especially in the Jewish Museum.
I'm sorry. Yes.
You appeared a lot, and I slowly pieced together this, this family link that. And again, you touched it in the bio, that the person, well, 2 people actually that I was really focusing on in my thesis, who were the lead figures in one of the main Yiddish companies in London in the 40s. So they called the New Yiddish Theatre Company, was in fact David's grandparents. So we have Abish Meisels as the artistic director, and then Clara Meisels, his wife, as one of the leading ladies. So that is the reason really that our paths have sort of interlinked over the last few years, how we sort of work together on these things. And, I've been incredibly fascinated actually in getting prepared for this and thinking about really how much in your upbringing, how much in your heritage, in the early days, were you aware that you came from what's the word,
There's yichus is the Yiddish word. Yichus, which it means like your family heritage, but if you've got a heavy yichus, So in Yiddish theatre terms, I suppose I do have a good yichus. I've said that word too many times now, but yeah, I mean, I didn't speak Yiddish growing up. I only, I mean, I've never felt it's been 30 years since I've been so keenly aware of my unfinished doctorate. So I always in my CV sort of say, he researched a PhD, keep it vague. But I feel that my parents are looking down going, you know, you could have, you could have been like you, I could have been getting a prize like you. And there's so yichus shmichus, they'd be saying, why didn't you finish your doctorate? But yes, I didn't speak Yiddish. My mum was a Yiddish speaker. She was the daughter of Abish and Clara. But I learned Yiddish. I learned Yiddish at Oxford. So I technically speak an Oxford Yiddish, or I suppose you could call it the King's Yiddish. And I think there was a sense where my dad was quite sort of Anglo-Jewish. He's quite Anglo. And sort of third or fourth generation in this country, and wanted us to be Anglo-Jews, the sort of Jews that aren't so connected to Eastern Europe, and so that's why I think that I didn't really speak Yiddish as a child, but that's quite a Yiddish thing. The thing about Yiddish is Katie, I'm sure you'll agree, is like, it's a marginal thing. It's liminal. You've got Hebrew, and you've got the Jewish religion, and you've got Zionism, and there's these identities, these ways of being Jewish, and then liminally there's sort of being Yiddish, and it's sort of in my household, I suppose. It was around as a thing. There was some of the people who you will have covered a lot in your PhD. The Chana Tselnica, the leading actress at the time. So they were drifted in and out of my life, and I was just aware of this very interesting language. I studied German at school and then at university, just of this very interesting language. And my mother would say things like, when she was feeding us food, which she did. That was her role as a mother. I make it sound like we're birds in a nest, but she would say, if the second course was ready, we hadn't finished the first course, she would say, "Schlaf giechach bedarf des Kischen," which means sleep quicker, I need the pillow. But because she wanted us to eat the quick, but for me, I'm going, what the hell is that? What the hell does that mean? So I just sort of aware of this really interesting language and culture that, because we were Anglo-Jews, was sort of hovering in the background. And then when I went to Oxford, that's where there was, for the first time, there was an option as part of the modern languages course where you could study Yiddish. So I did that as a part of my BA, and that was when Professor David Katz had started the Oxford, the part of the Postgraduate Centre for Hebrew Studies. There were actually 8 PhD students in Oxford there. It was a real centre. It was a really exciting centre at that time. Half the PhD students weren't Jewish. It's a very fascinating language, which we can maybe come on to. For linguists, it attracts, I mean, Katie, yourself, I don't think you're not Jewish. So it does, it's one of the things that makes me proud about Yiddish, is it attracts non-Jews, Jews, Chinese. There's a Yiddish Japanese dictionary. It's this fascinating language, which I'd love to hear what pulled you to it. But so a very long-winded way of saying it was around, but it wasn't central.
It's interesting. So we'll answer how I ended up here. Very much a product of the Parks Institute, I think. I was interested in, I think a lot of people, it happens, go through the history GCSE, you do a lot of Russian history. So you do a lot of Russian history modules. But in that, because we have that amazing link of Parks, there was always Jewish elements. And I become very interested in Eastern European culture, migrant culture. And I love theatre on a personal level. And I think, you just start hearing stories, you start seeing things. I become really interested in the idea of Birobidzhan, them having a theatre, and that's already escalated to.
Can we say what Birobidzhan is for those, or does everyone knows? Everyone knows.
Not explain it all.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, so Birobidzhan was an experiment in a sort of Yiddish Soviet republic. I mean, it was not quite, but it was a small area in Siberia or near Siberia. So, wasn't a glamorous part of the Soviet Union, but it's where the Soviets said, okay, this will be a Yiddish speaking area. You'll have all the administrative stuff would be done in Yiddish. It was at the time in the 20s and 30s when Stalin was encouraging nationalities to own their culture. Obviously, that all went a bit wrong, but for a while there was courts in Yiddish, Yiddish police people. Everything was in Yiddish. That's sort of it.
Yeah. No, spot on, well done.
Yeah, thank you.
But in sort of the pursuit of that, I realized that I couldn't speak Russian. I couldn't speak many of the languages I needed, but I could speak English, and I was learning Yiddish. And I started looking for literature on Yiddish theatre in London, and I get this out every time I do a talk. But that is what existed. And it's just not very much. And I think it's only 30 pages of actual text, the rest is photos. And it's brilliant, but it really enlightened me to that there is a massive gap in this history. I mean, we just didn't know anything, and I really want to change that. And, it's not just me. We've seen over the last decade really a growth in that area. But that's how I got in this. It's interesting hearing you reflect about the upbringing. So in preparing for this, I was reading a transcript of an interview with your mum, with David Schneider, who's the writer of that book, and it's from the 80s. And in that, she mentions of all your siblings, you were the only one who would always ask about Yiddish. You were always very curious, very intrigued, apparently, about Yiddish.
I have no memory. I've got very repressed. It's difficult stuff. We'll do the psychoanalysis later, but yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, actually. Do you remember it that way? Like, do you remember being inquisitive about the language? Because the way you say it, it's as if it wasn't until university. But here, your mum was implied from a young age, or she could just be.
No, I think there probably was. I was always interested in languages, and I think because I was quite close to my mum. Oedipus Schmiedipus will come to this. I sort of say, right up until her death. I was like, I was very close to her. We lived quite close. I always say sort of 3, maybe 4 apron strings away from her. And so I think there was a fascination. She was from a theatrical family. She was flamboyant. There was this European quality to her, which I think I sort of was fascinated with. Yeah, so I don't think she's lying there. So I think that's probably right. I just have no memory of it.
And it's interesting here to talk about your father having that Anglo-Jewish sort of stance, because I'd say that's something that Abish was very against. And I know he had no influence in this, but some literature that I've shared with you previously, but he really strongly had this panic about losing Yiddish in London. He wrote very strong-worded, Yiddish pieces about Anglo Jewry being the problem for Yiddish culture in London. And on this theme of suffering, one thing I was reflecting on, and I talk a lot in the thesis, is actually they weren't so much worried about non-Jewish interference in the Yiddish theatre in London in the 40s. It was the Anglo-Jewish interference, and it's a really poignant thing. Yes. Comes out in it.
That's really interesting, because I love speaking to Kate because she knows so much more about my family than I do. So it's really interesting. But yeah, I think the thing, again, forgive me if everyone knows, but Yiddish was, as I said, marginalized, and it was looked down on. It was called jargon, but jargon, if you like. It was not seen as a proper language, and you still get that nowadays. You say that people will say there's no literature, is it? It's just swear words and curses words, and it's got great swear words and great cursing, but it's just a bastardized German. You hear all this sort of thing, which is all it's the classic thing is like a language is a dialect with an army and navy, and that's the only difference, and that there's a way where I think when we were at Oxford, we were quite proud of the fact that Yiddish was more or less the same age as Oxford, like 1,000 years, and the same age as German. So you could, as English, sorry. So you could say, had Yiddish ended up with an army and navy and an empire over a third of the globe, that English was a bastardized German, and Yiddish, there's a way of turning it. But there is, especially amongst the Jewish community, there was a sense where this Eastern European language, we must, and culture, that's over now. We must repress it. It's slightly sort of sordid. It's the language of the marketplace, and Yiddishists such as my grandfather were very keen to say no, that it's high culture as well. It's a beautiful culture, a beautiful language, on a par with all other languages and cultures.
Yeah, and you're spot on that is his mission with the theatre company, actually, the New Yiddish Theatre Company, their entire thing. So there's 2 companies in London at the time. You had the Grand Palais and the New Yiddish Theatre, and their philosophy was heightening Yiddish theatre. Grand Palais, they could play the fun stuff, But at the New Yiddish Theatre, it was about serious theatre. And
Right.
I mean, they always had that conflict in the Yiddish theatre, and the Grand Palais survived longer than the New Yiddish Theatre did in
Yes.
the end.
And the
So-
Grand Palais was the sort of commercial, the more
Yes.
commercial one. Yeah.
And that leads us actually quite nicely onto, I guess, the theme of the talk, this Jewish humour, Jewish comedy, Jewish performance, but looking at the 1940s as an example. And the standout play, the grandfather wasn't involved in this play in the first iteration, but it's really interesting. It was done at the Grand Palais, and that is The King of Lampedusa, the König von Lampedusa, which was a Yiddish play. And I'll go into my spiel now of telling you the quick story of this as quickly as I can, but it was a play based on the true story of a Jewish RAF pilot who crash landed on the Italian island of Lampedusa. When he landed, the inhabitants surrendered to him. They gave him a note saying, "We surrender, please leave us alone." He just wanted to fill up his engine. But he did, he flew away, but all of his friends found out about the story, and he was titled The King of Lampedusa. This story was picked up by the press, and I think you've got to look at the context here. It's this idea that he got a Jewish land, that he was crowned king of this island, and it become a Jewish homeland. And of course, people knew that this was quite a silly story. It wasn't quite what happened, but it was a really interesting story and really captured the hearts of people at the time. Someone called Samuel Harrendorf, who was a correspondent journalist who was living in London at the time, saw this story and decided to write a play about it. And long story short, it started in 1943, but it ran for 6 months, which is almost unprecedented for a play. It's a Yiddish play, sorry, completely unprecedented. And it was a massive, massive hit in London. Very, very topical. It was revived again in 1947 and didn't do as well because of its topicality. But David, I know that you've actually been involved in some sort of readings of the play. In particular, I think the Act 2 scene.
Yes.
And I'd love you to explain that and talk about your experiences and thought about the play as a piece.
Yeah. So I've been off doing my career and now coming back to doing more Yiddish performance and getting into that. And we had a Yiddish evening a couple of months ago where we did do an extract from The King of Lampedusa, where there's a very, very talented Yiddish actor called Shane Baker, who was brought up a Presbyterian, but I would say now speaks the most authentic Yiddish theatre that I know. Yes, we did this bit where the King of Lampedusa, Sidney Cohen, and his dad are discussing who's going to be which of his ministers. So it's like the guy who taught at Cheder at Sunday school. He thinks he's got a big beard and he's a teacher, so he should be the Minister of Education. And this one, he's good at fighting, so maybe he should be the Foreign Secretary. So it's all sort of, and it was just it's very liberating, especially to work with Shane, because Yiddish theatre has a very different style from English performance, if you like, from the sort of RSC. It's very even with sort of more popular theatre, it's very big, and it's there's a lot of playing to the audience. It's quite sort of Victorian, and with sort of art theatre, it still relates to its heyday of the expressionistic 1930s. So it's also quite big and bold, and I found it very liberating to be able to perform in that style with Shane and bring the Lampedusa to life a little bit.
And I think you did the second act, didn't you? Which is the dream sequence.
No, I see. Unless that was a reading.
With the map part.
Right, we only did a little bit, but yeah. So then the dream sequence, that's when it's Lampedusa is this Jewish kingdom. Is that right? Yeah.
So that Act 2 is it's sort of sandwiched. It's 3 acts. The first act is the family in the East End. Very traditional Jewish family. They find out that their son has become a king. And then we go into Act 2, and it's all a dream sequence. So all of that is meant to be very funny,
Yes.
but also very topical. And I don't know if you felt that in the part that you read, because you do have, for example, the Reform rabbis coming in. So it actually ends that scene with Reform rabbis coming in and saying, "We think your proposal is ridiculous. This is a terrible idea. You don't want a Jewish state and a Jewish army." And Sam, who is Sidney Cohen in the play, Sam Kagan, he tears them down. But it's also so laced with comedy. And I think so David and I worked on the BBC Radio 4 documentary. I was just in it at the beginning, but we talked about this in there. And I would say that was a response to what was going on, definitely.
yeah.
But a comedic one as well.
Yes, and I think that's the thing that, if you situate it in the 90s, so the Second World War is happening, 1943, was it, did you say?
Yeah, 1943 it started.
Yeah, so they're just, obviously they know the start of the Holocaust and the terrible things that were already happening to Jews, but starting to get word of the mass extermination coming through. There's this sort of anxiety about Jewish identity, Jewish future, and your Jewish safety that then gets liberated in this play, where you have a Jew who is allowed, who makes his own country. Obviously, now, especially where we are literally now, this has different reverberations. But if we go back to the 1940s and the sort of yearning, my grandfather was a passionate Zionist. He wanted a Jewish state. My grandmother was a passionate communist, even Stalinist. They never spoke about politics between them. And that's like a very typical sort of Jewish household at that time. But I think that whatever the rights and wrongs that we can look at now, and especially now, that for that audience was a wonderful release and catharsis, this dream sequence, I think.
Definitely. And I think that's why when it was revived in 1947, it just wasn't as successful. It ran for 3 weeks. And that was at the New Yiddish Theatre. So your grandfather was involved in that production.
Right,
but,
okay.
it wasn't
His Midas touch, obviously, coming into it.
No, we won't go down that route. But no, it just was so topical, it didn't really translate.
Yeah.
By that stage, so what your grandfather did was actually, the Yiddish Theatre was so reliant in London on people touring and bringing new material. The war had stopped that. But I've sort of gone to the post-war period in 1946, and what he did was he adapted Avram Goldfaden. So he's, known as the grandfather of the Yiddish Theatre. He's, the big name. He had his King Ahasuerus operetta, based on the Purim story. But your grandfather adapted that, and he kept the story. But what they did, and this wasn't uncommon, but it's another one of showing this response to what was going on, was they had Haman, who is the bad person in it, the person who dislikes the Jews, being represented as Hitler. And I've always found that an interesting, response, I guess. And it wasn't unusual. It really was quite I've looked, and I think they were doing it in the DP camps. So
yes,
it was an unusual response, but it's a fascinating.
Yes, and I think that's we'll come on to talk about that more. But that sort of cathartic element. That, are we allowed to swear? I don't know. That FU element that you get with a certain comedy, and I think there was the element in that King of Lampedusa. You're doing, the Nazis were doing what they were doing, and sort of F you. That this is what we'll do in response, and we use comedy. We use Haman, Ahasuerus or a Purim play. The whole point is that you shout. The audience has got to shout. I mean, it was interesting actually. Slight diversion, but when we did this evening of Yiddish Theatre a couple of months ago, Vivi Lax, who's another historian of before your period, isn't she? She's a bit earlier. She did a thing, and I did a bit of patter as well. It's like getting the audience to be like a Yiddish audience, which is to shout, to eat, to heckle, to throw things, and it was okay for most of the show, but then we ended it with a one-act special, which dated. There was quite a misogynist character in it, and by the end I thought, we're not going to be able to control this audience, because there was a release there, and I think King of Lampedusa having a Hitler as Haman, there's that sort of catharsis of let's release the taboo, which you see in a lot of comedy. I remember early on in my career, we went to a comedy awards, and Spike Milligan, which who many of you may remember, as like he did the Goons show, is very, very funny, and he was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award, and they read out a letter from Prince Charles, as he was there, who loved the Goons, and he was just, Prince Charles was fawning over it, and it was just like, and we were live on TV, and the comedy awards were quite leery, but everyone's being very well behaved as Prince Charles. And at the end of it, this letter, Spike Milligan just said that Spike Milligan just went, groveling bastard, and it was such a moment of release. We all, it was there, and that's the essence of great comedy. knowing, and I think that's why Lampedusa worked, and is knowing what your audience is thinking and what they're repressing, really, and that's what a lot of your book is about. What, you know, that's how comedy just releases the repressed. And I think that's Yiddish can do that.
Half-time kids,
Okay.
well, I was going to say, I'm going to hand you over to Devorah in a second, but just my final closing question then, I think we sort of got there, but you started off not speaking Yiddish at home. And then we've heard, you know, you've gone to Oxford, this happened. So moving into David era,
Yes.
for you
I'm
now,
fully functioning
yeah.
human being.
To what extent would you say that Yiddish heritage influences your work, if any?
I think it's, you know, I've tried to make a career in the non-Yiddish world. You know, I have. Every time when I was an actor, I'd play a character, and then I'd think he was this sort of person, that sort of person, and I go, well, I'd see myself, and I go, well, he just looks like a Jewish guy. And so, but the style of comedy, I did stand up, and it was a very physical act. The way that I feel most comfortable is a Yiddish way. I mean, that's like, you know, Brexit has affected a lot of people, but it's just made me feel I am a European, and I've got that from my mum. I've got that from Yiddish. My style of performance, and now that I said I'm writing stuff about Second World War. I'm just writing stuff about Nazis now. I'm just accepting that's what I'm interested in, and I'm a lot of it is about comedy. Can you be funny? Was there comedy? I mean, one of my films is mostly set in a concentration camp, which is pretty grim. But you know, is there comedy there? What sort of comedy is there? And maybe we can speak about that. But so I think personally, and as I'm now older and I've established myself, I'm happy with that. I'm not bitter about the success of Inside Number 9 anymore. I've moved on from that. So I can now just be myself, and that's where I'm doing more Yiddish and writing more Yiddish and more Yiddish related stuff. Yeah.
So tell me more about your mother.
Yeah. Oh man. We'll never stop. This will go on for hours.
I'll get to that. No, so is there a Yiddish sense of humor?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, I mean, it is, how do you distinguish between a Yiddish and a Jewish sense of humor? I mean, I don't, you know, the word Yiddish means Jewish. There is, you know, you can't really say Jewish in Yiddish without using the word Yiddish. So it's quite hard to differentiate between Yiddish as a culture and Jewish. But I suppose it's that thing of feeling an outsider. I mean, what we talked about, well, Devorah, you were on that radio show that we did as well. So it's like feeling an outsider, but an insider as well. So you've got one foot in the party, chatting, but you know where the doors are, you know where to, your other foot's ready to leave at any moment, and you know, you're constantly vigilant, and I think that gives you an edge and an outsiderness, which then becomes quite universal in a way, because everyone sort of feels like an outsider. So I'd say it's like that sort of outsider quality that is particularly Yiddish and Jewish, I guess.
So would you say that as a comedian, the first question I've written here is, why are you a comedian, David?
Yeah, okay, that's.
And actually, I want to ask, why are you a comedian, David?
But again, how long have you got? And my mother, and I suppose it saves on therapy. That's the possible answer. I think.
No, say more about that. In what way? In what way?
Well, it is a type of therapy. It's a type of defense, of course. You know, the classic make the bully laugh, make jokes. I mean, when I read, there's my school Velite or whatever, my school leaving thing, and it was just full of puns about being Jewish and having a big nose, and it was like, they were funny, I suppose, for that age, but it was just really, it's like saturated in self-loathing. And now, but so I think there was a sort of defensiveness to it. But I think my mum was clever as well, that I can't remember my mum ever laughing at anything I said or did. But what she would do is go, not bad. Not bad. And I think that's probably what, we could have a seance now with a Ouija board. And if I could go for my best joke, I know that it would spell out not bad. So I think comedy is just a way where I've found to express the pain, and that's I think what that's what the Jewish comedy is, I suppose.
And did it work? Did you ward off the bullies through being funny?
Well, to a certain degree, yeah, to a certain degree. But I think there's a sort of joy in when I think about joyous moments, truly joyous moments where I'm not got one foot out the door. And it is when I think about stand-up and when it was going really well and there's just a laugh and suddenly you forget about yourself when there's a big laugh and then you forget yourself. But then I also remember if the laughs were too big, I'm doing very Talmudic gestures here, and it's sort of how Yiddish I am. When the laughs are too big, if I was storming it too much. I remember one gig like up the creek was a really tough gig, but if they went with you, well, I could say anything. I could say anything. I remember feeling I don't like this anymore, and so there's a sort of and that's again. I mean, how deep do you want to go? I think that's.
I want to go deeper.
Right.
Why didn't you like it anymore?
Well, I think it's to do with my mum, and I think this. I mean, we're going to go into darker territory here, but she was a Holocaust survivor, and she was lucky compared to many. She came out in 1938 from Austria. There's an amazing picture of her as a 15-year-old reading a Yiddish paper in front of a newsstand in Vienna, full of pictures of Hitler and Nazi newspapers, But so she came out, and I think as a result, she is edgy. She was edgy about any mass hysteria, mass movement, and for her, for instance, the Princess Diana death was very, very difficult because she sensed that this could go anywhere. Someone could stand in front of these people because there was such a mass hysteria. And I think after several years of analysis, that's why I can't. If things go too well, we're doing all right here. I'll tell you if it's going too well. It's uncomfortable. But it's like then it just tips into. Well, I could become a dictator now. I could do, and I don't like that. I worry about the crowd then. And I think a lot of what I'm writing now as I become more mature and more open is about, and that's Stalin, and I'm working with Armando Iannucci on something set in the Nazi period now, is how ordinary people are capable of really bad things. So there's 3 or 4 things that I'm writing, which I suppose you can boil down to however
Your mother.
Yeah. So but how that thing about watch out for crowds and what they can do.
I mean, I really felt this when I was investigating the Jewish joke. Maybe it's just true of the joke, but certainly characteristic of the Jewish joke, and certainly of the Yiddish sort of curse, is that if there's good news, the joke and essentially the sensibility finds the bad news within it. So doing too well would not bode well for any self-respecting Jewish performer. I always think about comedy that it's I mean, stand-up in particular, the language is just, if it doesn't go well, you died. It's so existential that kind of and I want to ask you about I even quote you in my joke book, some shtick you do in one of your stand-up routines, but I want to start with I want to talk about you as a performer and then as a writer, because we're doing the part of your life that's you. So yeah, and then we'll get to your mother and
a Jewish Christmas Carol, where it's all about my mother, but we've had the ghost of Christmas past, now a Christmas present.
Well, no, but first of all, before I do that, I just feel we should just lead with the slightly Yiddish thing. So what is your favorite Yiddish curse?
So yeah, my favorite. Okay, let's go. Yeah, my favorite. I've got 2, I suppose, which I really love because they're illustrative of going the extra mile in cursing. So the first one is sollen dir alle Zähne rausfallen, kurz einer, und der soll dir ewig wehtun. So it's in two parts. It's like, may all your teeth fall out except for one, and from that may you have eternal toothache. It would be enough. It would be enough. Diane, it would be enough to just have all your teeth fall out. But no, Talmudically, you've got to go further and it's more pain. And so, so there's another one like, brennen sollst du onstrachovne. Now, brennen sollst du is may you burn. That's bad enough. But onstrachovne means without being insured. Now that is really bad. And it's that secondary thing that I think is so I love that follow, the 1-2.
Mine, I can't do it in Yiddish. Maybe you could translate. Mine is, may you be so rich that you're the richest person in your whole family.
Oh, that's clever.
No, whatever.
Yeah.
I didn't get it. Okay, so I want to go back to
Trauma.
I want to do your career. So because this experience of yours is both a performer, writer, director, right? It is very varied, and you were working on some really much beloved shows.
Yeah.
So can we talk about what it was like? I Am Alan Partridge and the Day-to-Day.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, I mean,
Morris,
I suppose given that it's the Parks Institute, so Armando Iannucci got the team together for it was On the Hour was the radio equivalent of the Day-to-Day initially, and as it's the Parks Institute, it was 3 Jews and 3 Catholics, and I don't think he went right. He doesn't speak like this at all. But I'm going to do a TV show. And it's going to be 3 Catholics and 3 Jews. That's not been done before. But it just happened that that's the team that he assembled happened to be that. So there was this sort of already within, if you like, the sort of C of V, if we make that the sort of majority culture, there's already this sort of edginess in it. There was some I knew Armando from Oxford. We performed together. Rebecca Front was from Oxford. We knew her. Patrick Marber likewise. So you got a Oxford, non-Oxford split as well. So yeah, we also had some people who weren't from Oxford. So there was Chris Morris and Doon. And then there was Steve Coogan, of course, who was very clear that he had something that the rest of us may, he had something a little bit more with the Partridge character, especially. And I was there when Alan Partridge was born, when we were, which was a hideous thing, coming out fully adult and sports casual gear. And when he was named, when we decided what he would be called, when we decided where he would come from. And that was like, all these are lessons in, when I talk about how to write comedy. Initially, there was a thought that Alan would come from Milton Keynes, because that was a funny place, especially back then in the 90s. But it was like, no, that's too funny. And I think what was great about Armando and that team was like to not stop at the first stop on the funny line, but to just stay on the train and see where it goes. And where it goes was Norwich, which is definitely much funnier, much more original. It's like uncharted territory, but it's got that sort of luminous quality comedically, which Milton Keynes felt a bit obvious. And that's what I learned a lot with working with those people. It was the adherence to a realism. So when Chris did a thing about horses on the underground for the Day-to-Day, and there was an infestation of horses, and how people were, workers were going around killing them with hammers. And it's just the delivery and everything about it was so real. And then you can have the absurd to come around it. And that's what I learned. There was an absolute rigor, which Armando and Chris have, and the rest of us have learned from them, or when it comes to being very specific. So that's what you've got with the on strachowna, without insurance. You've gone from a general into a really specific thing. You've gone from Milton Keynes to Norwich, and that's what I've learned there. That's what I try and apply. That's where successful comedy is. That's where successful art is. Is where you've gone somewhere original, and you've pushed on.
Do you think they saw something particular? I mean, you were all working together, but was there something that you were bringing to this that you felt was specifically coming from this sort of history?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of brought a sort of much more physicality, which I guess, and I don't know where it comes from, but it's genetically there. But I was always a very physical performer, which fits very much with the clowning and the badchen, which is a sort of the wedding jester. There's a big tradition of Tumler, you've got Danny Kaye, for instance, who started in the Yiddish Theatre, this sort of physical, verbal dexterity. And I think that's, I don't think Armando said we need the Yiddish, but, it's that sort of thing, is, I guess, what I brought.
You just told me earlier you have the only joke in Mission Impossible.
Yes. Again, I don't think Brian De Palma was going, I need a Yiddish. They all speak like this for some reason. I need a Yiddish joke at the end. But yeah, for those of you who haven't seen Mission Impossible or not seen it for a while, so it's all very heavy and actiony and everything. And then at the end, there's this sort of chase in the Channel Tunnel with the train and TC, as he was known. TC, Tom Cruise, flies the helicopter in it, and there's all sorts of shenanigans and crashes, and then helicopter crashes, he ends up on the train, etc. And then at the end of it, I faint. And I couldn't believe, there's just completely, there's not a laugh in it. Brian De Palma would shoot you rather than have a laugh. And I just thought that's not going to be in, but he kept it in. And at the premiere, which was my first big film, and I went along to the premiere, and it was all very posh. And I was so excited to see myself on the big screen, and I didn't think it would be. I just stood up and went, Vanessa Redgrave was there, and sorry, I was like, obviously it was me. Anyway, so yeah, that was. I don't think again a Yiddish thing, but yeah, it was good fun.
Oh, and so I wonder. So then that was your working as a team, and then there's something very lonely about the stand-up act.
Yeah.
It's just you on the stage,
Yeah,
and you're going to die if you don't. So, so can you tell us about your what were you doing in your stand-up?
yeah. My stand-up was very like a Yiddish clowning act. Really, there was a lot of. I mean, it wasn't Yiddish. It was like I did sort of mime to a slow motion footballer. I peeled an orange as if it was a striptease. Crazy stuff. And I had a Hungarian magician character called Zero Talent who did terrible, bad tricks, and spoke gobbledygook, which was sort of a Yiddishy gobbledygook. Yeah, but it is lonely, and when you would die. I died a couple of times, and you have this strange out of body experience, which was very like the experience when I went too well. That you just sort of hover above yourself going, what is going on? I don't understand that, which is a weird thing. But, I was very pleased to move on from stand-up. It was,
right. So you're not driven to go back?
Well, no, but I am putting together a Yiddish 20, 30 minutes. I'm not going to take it to the Comedy Store. I don't think it's going to survive. But yeah, so I'm the only performance I do now is in Yiddish. Really, I don't act anymore in English. But
do you want to tell that? Because I've got some in my book of jokes.
Yes,
I've got some shtick from your stand-up.
Yes, well, because I also did Jewish stand-up. Yeah. So I did have a separate Jewish act that was very, very Jewish. Just went there and said things that for a Jewish audience, it was again that taboo. Back in the 90s, Jews were still a little bit repressed, and it was, because we're totally not repressed now, of course. But it's like, the joy of seeing, this very Jewish act. But the story that's sort of relevant to what our theme is meant to be today is that was about whether you could do stuff about the Holocaust, which I didn't touch in my act, but at all. But I was the compere of 3 or 4 other Jewish comedians that we took on tour, and I once got a note in before the show saying, "We are a coachload of Auschwitz survivors come to see you. Will you give us a shout out during the show?" And you just go, "Well, what am I meant to do? Anyone in from Auschwitz tonight?" And now it's really, I love telling that little anecdote because I can see the reaction, especially, this is all the lights are on. So I can see that you're a bit shocked, that you're enjoying it, that, I can see that all of you playing around with me, playing around with the taboo of that. And then we sort of all felt safe enough to laugh about that. And that's the area I'm really interested in. I did do, as a trial, I did do 10 minutes of stand up just about the Holocaust and about me and the Holocaust. I realized that my favorite set of pajamas was blue and white striped pajamas, and I wasn't aware of it, but I did tell a joke. There's a joke that's sort of from the 1930s Germany that I think is really interesting. So it's about a Jewish guy, he's a farmer. So already, what do we know about Jewish farmers? But so a Jewish guy, he's a farmer, he's out in this field. Hitler drives past, sees that there's a Jew. He gets out the car with his gun, and he points to a cow pat, tells the Jew he's got to eat from the cow pat. So the Jew has to get down and eat from the cow pat. And Hitler's loving it. He's laughing so much that he drops his gun, and the Jew picks it up and he points it at Hitler, and he says, "Right, now you eat." So Hitler then has to eat from the cow pat, and then he lets Hitler go, and he goes home to his wife, and his wife says, "Well, how was your day? Anything exciting happened?" He said, "Not really." "Oh, you never guess who I had lunch with." And I love that joke. That's an authentic joke from that time, and part of the stuff that I've been doing, and we're obsessed with it, Devorah and I, is how you can push into the darkness, and what when you have a right to make a joke that's dark. Obviously, I can do it because I'm Jewish. I can do it because I'm the son of a survivor. Would I do it to a survivor? I don't know. If this was a room full of survivors, maybe I wouldn't feel so comfortable doing it. Examining all those areas is really interesting. And I know there's stuff that in the books I've been reading about humor in the camps, because that joke is sort of okay because it's not in the camps yet. But when you get into the camps and you read, this is a more difficult joke, but we're on a journey now. It's like, and a woman said that she decided that she was going to get through the camps through humor, and she did things like when she first went in and her hair was shaved. She would say, "Well, it's not my normal style, but Giuseppe, who normally does my hair, he's not available, and it's free." And a lot of the people around her were going, "What the?" Found it really, really uncomfortable to the point where it made them aggressive. But her decision was, "I'm going to laugh my way through it," and she survived. But I find that all the last 2 minutes of stuff that we've been talking about, that's interesting and dangerous, and that's you're trying to unpick that. I think is really
sometimes it bothers me sometimes with comedians that it really does seem that if they're told don't go here, they go there. So that seems to be a real compulsion sometimes that anything that seems off limits, that they have to find a way. And why do they have to? Why do you have to?
But why is a thing off limits? I suppose it's probing the nature of taboo and understanding there are jokes that I would not make. I definitely wouldn't make, and I'm not one of these.
For example?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's interesting, these comedians, Ricky Gervais, for instance, who are part of this, like, you can say everything you want. I don't think you should say, and you can say anything you want. You can say stuff that's relevant to your identity. I don't think you should punch down. I think woke is good. Personally, I wouldn't just go, "Oh, what woke people say that they can't. You can't say that." I would respect other identities, other minorities, and I would listen to their humor. So I don't. I personally don't feel that I can go and say anything, but I think anything can be said.
So what is, so what then, okay, so what is the need to find the funny in these dark places? What is that need?
I think it's, yeah, I mean, again, this is stuff that you've thought about a lot. So I feel, but it's like, I guess it is that small act of resistance. In the camps, I think that's what that woman who I was talking about, it's a small act of resistance. What I'm reading and, I'm writing, the film I'm writing is more about a musician, but the music and that was in actually Sachsenhausen camp. It's that things like music and memory and humor are the most human things that we have. And when you're trying to be dehumanized, again, this is very topical, maybe those are the things that you need to grab onto. And if someone says you can't have humor, that being the thing that's, that being my instrument, if you like, someone says you can't have humor, then it's sort of like saying you can't be a human being. So we look at how we can be a human being.
So I mean, you moved from sort of sketch show sitcoms through stand-up to then not that. Now you're really writing, directing. Now you moved. I always love this quote from the very funny novelist Philip Roth about the very funny novelist Franz Kafka, that he said he was a sit-down comedian, and I think the sit-down comedian is the writer who's figuring it out in writing. And with Armando, you did The Death of Stalin.
Yes.
Stalin was a dictator.
Yes.
And now Hitler's your project, I think. It's so what is it with you and dictators?
I want to be one.
The other way.
But I mean, I suppose it is that with Stalin, I mean, the brilliance of Death of Stalin, I think, is Armando's genius to get the tone right, because that could have been awful. And in most people doing it, it would have been awful. But what we always tried to do was just to stick to the truth. Sometimes the truth was too crazy. I mean, I don't know if you've all seen the film. Please do. I'll get 23p or whatever you do. But it's like it starts with a conductor at a radio recording, and he's conducting some concerto. And then there's a phone call. Stalin wants it recorded. And the conductor, he just panics and faints and bangs his head. So they have to go and get another conductor. And it's all very crazy and it's very absurd and funny, but true. But actually, the real truth was that the conductor that they got was too drunk. So they had to get another conductor, a third conductor. But we sort of thought, well, that is too preposterous. So I think it was that sense where you got to make something really believable. And Armando was brilliant at making something believable. So you didn't minimize the horror, but you did expose the sort of horror in a different way. The sort of, you could satirize. I think what's fascinating about dictators, or this new film we're doing, is there's Goebbels features strongly, is they are, whether we like it or not, they do belong to the same species as us. They are human beings technically, but they are so different from us. And what is the difference, and how we like to go? I mean, obviously, we talk about the banality of evil, etc., but we like to say a Hitler, a Goebbels, a Stalin is so different from us. And I think that's what was interesting about writing Stalin, or writing what we're doing now, is that, yeah, but would we ever end up like that? How many different decisions would take us there, or would we never? And that's where it's very contemporary, where you see how the world is going warringly, and you just think, yeah, it's just we're not too far. And whether you're just a foot soldier or a civilian, or just someone who's voting for a far right party, or whether you are a dictator, how far are we in our smug sense from that? I don't know, and that's what's interesting.
It is. Oh,
Last question?
oh, last question.
Sorry.
I never got to your mother. Because I wanted to, well, because you have to. One of the things we have noticed with joking, with the funny, is that before those before Trump and there's after Trump, right? So there was the time when it's the domain of the joke seemed to belong to sort of liberals, and they were laughing at rednecks or whoever it was. And then there was Trump, when it suddenly seemed that liberals were easily offended and had lots of lines you couldn't cross, and then everything was game, like the alt-right, and the jokes suddenly seem to be landing in the opposite direction. It's the odd thing with humor as a sort of way of and now you're trying to write into this moment with woke is good and looking at these sorts of, trying to find the jokes that can, I presume, turn the tables on this kind of.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and also obviously woke is good is I mean, is a generalization, but any extreme is not good. An extreme that silences certain behaviors is not good. But I generally think that I will always side on the people who are punched down on and minorities, and I think that's what woke is. You know, and woke comedy is, to me, just being aware of punching up and punching down, being aware of sensitivities of people, and you can still be funny. You can still be funny. I do believe that. I don't know if I agree with my dear friend Devorah totally about the change in liberals were funny, and then I know this is not what you're saying, and then now the alt-right are funny. I think
That's what I'm saying.
is that what you're saying? Yeah. I don't think the alt-right are
They're not
funny.
funny,
They're
you're
not.
right,
I
they're
don't
not
think that. I
funny.
think because to be funny, you need to be sort of. There needs to be self-deprecation, I think, and self-awareness, which perhaps they lack.
But they have no limits, right, to what who they're prepared to laugh at. So they offer a kind of orgiastic,
Yes.
a kind of orgiastic
Yeah.
release of
Yes.
the kind of
Of the
freedom
taboo,
that
yeah, and that is good. That's
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I think I might become alt-right actually. No, that you're right. That is something that.
Here's the challenge.
Yeah.
How you turn I mean, it's a challenging moment, I think, for
Yeah.
comedy that wants.
But you have to, I suppose, that's what satire does, you know, and it's all this Trump is unsatirizable, and to a certain degree, he does his own, he self-satirizes the whole time. But yeah, that's why I think for me, for Armando, history is an interesting way to say, look what's going on, and to try and claw back some of that, where you have a sort of laboratory feel, but it's actually about now. But it's tricky though.
Good.
Yeah. But yeah. Yeah.
Apparently, I have to stop.
Well, we'll see if there are no questions. Maybe you'll have another chance. But thank you.
Oh my God.
Can you give your mic to the student and?
Right, so Bear and I are going to do a double act. I think you're going to watch the screen.
Yeah.
And I'm going to watch the audience. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much. Really interesting. Not what I normally do on a Tuesday evening, I can say, but it was really fascinating. But are there any questions either online or from the audience? I think you've stunned them.
Yeah.
Yes, over here, please. Yes, please, sir.
Thank you for that. I enjoyed it greatly. We've been dancing around, never actually said it straight, but dancing around the idea of the profundity of comedy. However silly it can be, there is something profound very often in it. So what's the most profound joke in this field that you know? That's a hard one, I know, but I just open up that possibility. Something that really does reverberate as well as give a belly laugh.
Gosh. I mean, I'd have to get your email address and send you that, because I mean, can you think of one that's of, yeah, go for it. Well, no, I don't know which one you're thinking of. Which one? Just you do it. You do it.
No, I can't do it.
But just I didn't hear what it was. Which one?
It's really, it's a very dark, it's a Holocaust joke. So yeah,
Is that one?
yeah, you do it.
No, I can't run.
No. It's just it's a disturbing joke, but the Holocaust survivor dies, gets up to heaven, meets God. God tells God a Holocaust joke, and God doesn't laugh. So the survivor shrugs. Guess you had to be there.
And that is such a good joke. And that's so illustrative of what we're saying as well, because you do have to be there and you do have to have an identity that relates. And it's a great joke. Yeah. Yeah.
Very profound. Yes. You're very unsure about yourself when you're laughing at that joke.
I know one that I think came from Leo Roston. And
Mike,
I think I could
Mike.
write 2000, sorry. I know one which I think came from Leo Roston, which I think I could write 2,000 words on and would reveal a vast range of things about what it is to be Jewish. And it's just this silly
What is
joke
that?
about Nazi Germany.
Go on. You've got to tell it. You've got to tell us it now.
Right, so it's the night before a Nuremberg rally, and two German Jews decide they're going to assassinate Hitler. So at midnight, they creep in to the stadium and they hide themselves under the speaker's rostrum, and they know that Hitler is due to arrive at noon, and being German, he will arrive at noon. So they're down there, quiet as a mouse, armed to the teeth for the assassination. And noon comes and the stadium is full of Nazis and people have made speeches, but Hitler hasn't arrived. And 5 minutes past noon, he still hasn't arrived. 10 minutes past noon, no Hitler. And at 1:15 one of them turns to the other and says, "Please God, nothing should have happened to him." Now, I think that's
That's very Jewish. That's great.
you could do a lot with that one.
Yeah. Right.
Can,
Would-
okay, Tony, and then we have a question in the,
Yeah.
in Zoom.
Thank you very much. It relates to the last bit of the conversation about the alt-right not being funny. How do you deal with someone like Bernard Manning, obviously dead, but how do you deal with someone that was genuinely funny, had superb comic timing? And as with your sort of early radio thing, Catholic and Jewish, Mancunian, which sort of that's the Steve Coogan bit as well. So, but genuinely brilliant as a comic, but politics, or the politics he performed, were alt-right.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question and a really good example as well, because he was very funny. And I remember laughing at a really unpleasant joke, a racist joke, but he did it so well that he disarmed you. And I guess it plays into what you decide is you don't want to be disarmed in that way. And I guess, with our families, with our friends, we will make Bernard Manning style jokes. We will make risky jokes because we know that we're not racist. We know we don't mean it, whatever it is. So it's about forums, and this is where it does get controversial and woke, and whether he should be allowed to tell those jokes. I think he should. That is when you get someone who's good, and I suppose that's why I'm interested in dictators. When you get someone, I'm not saying Bernard Manning would make a great dictator, but obviously when you have some poison, if you like, racism or the Nazi ideology, if you can put it across well, that is dangerous, because even someone as right on as me, we didn't say woke back in the 90s, we said PC gone mad. Even someone like me who's PC gone mad can be disarmed and can say, oh, I quite like that Bernard Manning. So it's just being very aware of the dangers of someone who is that good, I think. Maybe. Did you have thoughts on that?
Okay, question from the chat from Brian Walsh. What? This one should catch it. So he says, being Irish, I feel at times I have an honorary PhD in repression. Do you think that much suffering can lead a people to be blind to that of others?
I mean, I hope not. I mean, it shouldn't. Again, it's a very topical question. I hope if we are humor, I mean, what I love about Jewish humor at its best, Yiddish humor, is that it is aware of the human condition. That joke that you just told about, I hope nothing's happened to him. That's a very Jewish joke, but it's a universal. I bet there are other cultures that joke would reverberate really well. So I think it's about doing the specific that then becomes universal. And if you make sure that you're celebrating your marginality, hopefully you will not be celebrating your dominance over other people, and you won't be blind to the suffering of others. One hopes. Anyone?
Other questions? Other questions? Please.
Camera's moving round. Yeah.
So sophisticated.
I work here in the university, and we're wrangling with artificial intelligence at the moment, what to do about it and all these kind of things. But one useful thing you can do is kind of give it instructions to play a particular role, to sort of, you are this thing, and tell me something back in that role. And people have tried it with various identity groups. So have you ever tried to have a chat with a Yiddish artificial intelligence? And what would it say?
No, I imagine its mother thinks it's the most artificial intelligence. Yeah, the most intelligent. No, I know, it's really interesting. I mean, I about 6-7 months ago, I did a little article about AI and comedy, and how far it had to go. I mean, things move so quickly, but just the nature of the jokes, AI telling jokes and understanding of jokes was very primitive and very just about basic puns. And I sort of then, and I'd have to have another look now where we're at, felt that, humor is something that AI is possibly one of the last things that AI will actually manage to master, which then you think, oh, that'd be quite a good film idea. I shouldn't give it away, actually, where like, instead of this sort of Blade Runner thing where, you can tell with the iris or whatever, it's through humor where you can tell whether it's AI or not. I'm going to write that down. But yeah, but I haven't tried that, and I will. So thank you.
So we've got a comment online, which Claire, if you can just read it out,
Yeah,
please.
Marina says, I think comedy is largely recognition of what is to be human, and we find kinship when we laugh in recognition.
Very good. Yes. Excellent.
Any further questions? As though we're. What? Please, yeah.
The last one.
A last question, and then I'll. Please, yeah.
Can I ask a question that isn't about Yiddish humour, but about your career? So I'm interested to know, because you are the subject of a internet meme, somewhat well-known internet meme, and just
Smell my cheese one.
Yes, smell my cheese.
Yeah.
So has that had any effect on your life at all? Does it have any effect?
So yeah, I mean, there's Smell My Cheese has had an effect in that. So that's from the I'm Alan Partridge, the first episode where he tries to get a commission, and he has a sort of breakdown, and he ends up, I play the commissioning editor of the BBC, and he ends up putting a big round of Stilton in my face and saying, smell my cheese. And so that's, for many years, that has been something that people shout at me in the street, and it's there are worse things. I am dairy allergic. That is a bit of a problem. I don't shout that back at them, but it's very flattering. But there is another meme, which I don't know if that's the one you refer, which in that scene, Alan Partridge is introduced to the head of sports or something, or head of news or something, and he just sort of goes like, well, okay. And that's a meme that I'm proud to be on the other side of. I'm often not in the meme itself, but it's like, I mean, that's the great, amazing thing about having been in something that is so iconic like that, where, you just feel very proud. You know that people love it and quote it. And I feel like Michael Palin was in Death of Stalin, and the joy that I felt that Michael Palin of Monty Python was in something that I'd written. It's lovely to feel that people feel that the next generation feels that about Partridge and some of the oeuvre. So yes, it's a lovely feeling.
Right. So, can I start by thanking the panel? Really fascinating and very kind of insightful as to how different people kind of look and use humour. So, really been, very fascinating from my perspective. I'm sure from what you've heard from the audience as well. Can I also thank Dawn and Elizabeth for presenting their awards? Really very grateful for that. And I want to just finish on an observation because something that resonated very strongly with what you said, and hopefully in keeping with the theme of tonight, was you said when you were writing the kind of death of Stalin, that you decided to tone down a scene because it was the actual reality was even crazier. One of my favourite scenes from a comedy was one set in a university, and it was there's a pair of series called A Very Peculiar Practice and A Most Peculiar Practice, written by Andrew Davis, set in an on-campus surgery, and the doctor is treating the professor of creative writing for depression. he says to him, "Why are you depressed?" He said, "Well, I try to come up with these stories that stretch reality beyond what's credible, and then the university does something that's even more incredible." And I think many of my colleagues think senior management fits that bill. But anyway, can I say really appreciate the contribution. I thank you very much to the audience, both online and obviously here in the room. I hope you enjoyed it. We really appreciate you coming and supporting the university because it's the sort of debate that should go on in organisations like this, and really appreciate all of the contributions tonight. So thank you very much.